after the great freeze of the entire country, but what really hit us here in North Texas and in the Southwest, pipes were bursting everywhere, and the two main things that you lose is sheetrock and wood floors. And I've looked at several homes, and I've looked at many over the years that have had water damage after things like this occurred. And it could be a tornado, it could be busted pipes, whatever it is. But when water gets on that floor, you have to make some quick decisions. And then after you get to the point to where you're ready to replace it, if that's what you have to do, then you need to really make some tough decisions on what to replace it with. And my friend John Dupra, who is I guess, John, are you the president of Revel Woods?
I prefer acting CEO. Chief Evangelism Officer, you abbreviate that any way you want. I'm coming to you from my world headquarters, which is my house.
Your basement.
Not my parents' basement, though, so moving up.
It's not your parents' basement. Good boy.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm only 37. I'm young for moving out of my parents' house for my generation.
There's still time, brother. There's still time.
Might end up back in there. Who knows? It's been a weird year.
Well, we've had this... and you got it. I think it hit everybody, but down here and in the southwest part of the country and the southern part of the country, where we're not really equipped for these big sub-zero periods of time, and our plumbing just isn't made for it. We of course had just gazillions of pipes burst, and a lot of people, or me included, we get a lot of calls from people begging contractors to come out and do something. One of the things that I talk to people about, of course, is their flooring, because that's one of the things that gets destroyed. And a lot of us now have, instead of traditional wood floors, we have an engineered wood floor or some type of alternate flooring that looks like wood, that may be some sort of composite with a vinyl coating on it. Whatever it was, it probably got ruined in the wood floor. So the big question comes up with all of these homeowners that are having to replace floors: what do I go back with that'll protect me when this happens again? What is your advice?
So it's a great question, and it was obviously horrible what happened in the lower Midwest and the Southwest and Southeast, I guess. But I was going to say, hope you enjoyed our Western New York winter sample pack. That's our biggest export at the moment, so people don't leave. But obviously, all joking aside, a lot of people were hurting in all different types of ways. So it's a great question, right? Whenever something happens and there's water damage, typically the floor is going to have to be replaced. And the first thought is, well, is there some product I can use that prevents this in the future? And the answer is maybe, but there's other things you have to consider with that. So I know our company, we specialize in wood flooring. We also have a couple lines of vinyl that, you almost have to have these days because it's so popular, but there's some misconceptions about that. So I think it's really important to kind of talk about, what is right for your specific situation, because we've had places, even before you had pipes burst, we have a lot of appliances leak. They don't make them like they used to, I guess. And so the houses would flood because the appliance broke. And one of the things that they would say is, I had wood in there, the wood warped, I want to replace it with something more waterproof, whether it's engineered wood flooring, which is more water resistant than solid wood flooring, or vinyl or some kind of resilient flooring. And the thing you have to worry about, though, with water damage is what's underneath that floor. So if you're right on top, floating on top of a concrete slab, you probably are okay with vinyl. If you've got some kind of wood subfloor or something in there that can hold that moisture, your floor, if you had a vinyl floor, for example, may not warp if you have a flood, but you could have a serious mold issue underneath that. So at some point, even if the floor isn't necessarily damaged, depending on your situation, you may still have to replace it. So my advice is really get what you want, because if you're in a situation where you're going to have to replace it anyway, unless you're anticipating this happening every year, there's a lot of time in between when you hopefully have to replace that again. So you
Well,
should
and
enjoy the space you live in.
a lot of these decisions are made when you're emotionally involved with it, right?
Right.
You just went through this horrible ordeal. You wake up in the middle of the night and step out of bed, and you're stepping in 3 inches of cold water.
Yeah,
That-
no power and it's freezing
Well,
out, right? I mean, that was a horrible
exactly.
experience you guys went through. You were not equipped for it, but it's the same kind of thing, right? Like, are you gonna set up Dallas, Texas, the way Rochester, New York is set up because it might happen once every couple of years? Probably not. Maybe a little more winterized than it was, but your home's kind of the same thing. If you're thinking, well, I'm going to be ready for the next flood, and you get this thing that in between those floods you just hate and then ultimately have to replace anyway, that's not necessarily the wisest decision either. So it is important to take your circumstances into account, but also know, what are you really preventing against, and how likely is it that, again, I went with something that was more water resistant, but I had to throw it out anyway because I had mold, or I would.
So let's talk a
possibility of
little
mold.
bit about the installation part of this. So if you have like an engineered wood floor and a slab foundation, a lot of people go in and they glue that wood floor down to that concrete.
Yes.
And of course, I've been railing against this for years because I think it's such a bad idea, and I've experienced having to replace it too many times. But if you had a engineered floor that was sealed on the bottom and you had a floating floor as opposed to having it glued down, do you think that there's any way some of that could be salvaged or may survive better?
I think so. Well, it'll be easier to replace. So if you have something that's floating and not glued, especially if it's the worst is when it's glued to gypcrete. That is, as any contractor will tell you, not their favorite thing to do. We'll say politely. So if it's glued there, it's you can remediate it, but it's impressive. If there's only a little bit of water damage and it's a floating floor, you can do several just board replacements. I mean, this is more common if a refrigerator leaks more than if,
Right.
The pipe bursts and your whole house is underwater and you're looking at your neighbor out next door building an ark or whatever. But yeah, you can always replace a section of a floor. And especially if you have some extra boxes after, after you've put that floor in. Usually we recommend having a few extra boxes just in case you ever need to do a repair, or maybe it's not even because of water, right? Like somebody dragged something across the floor and it damaged 3 boards. You're going to replace an entire house worth of flooring because 3 boards got scratched.
Well, we always recommend that we leave a few extra boxes, and if when you're purchasing that engineered floor, a lot of times people will go out and they'll purchase the last, the stuff that's on sale. Never going to be, we're never going to run this one again. You can have it half price. You better get a few extra boxes for sure. I wanted to touch
God
on.
forbid you run short.
I wanted to run on solid wood. Talk about solid wood floors for a second.
Okay.
Now, solid wood floors, and let's say you have a pier and beam house, a traditional older home with pier and beam, and you have a solid wood floor. That floor is always going to have some cupping, seasonal. I call it seasonal cupping. So it does seasonal cupping when it's humid outside, or if you're running your air conditioner and you're introducing this cold, moist air into the house, and that wood does what wood does. It kind of cups. And then when it dries out, it goes back down. Now, our rule of thumb on these floors that have had water damage from my floor guy of many years is to wait 6 or 8 weeks before you replace them.
If the issue is cupping, yes. So wood is, especially solid wood. This doesn't happen as much with engineered wood because of the way it's engineered. A lot of people too get confused with terminology when they think there's solid hardwood. They think of as real hardwood, and then engineered is like some sort of weird sort of facsimile. That's not true. Engineered wood is considered real wood. It's just made slightly differently, and it is more resistant to moving. So a solid wood floor, right? You have like it's not a creative name. Each plank is a solid piece of wood. So it moves, right? Like a sponge. It absorbs moisture. It's hydroscopic, I believe is the proper term for that. I've learned from one of these books behind me. The,
I was wondering if you read
water,
any of those.
yeah, I've read them all. But the so when seasons change, things like that, it will move. When it cups, the moisture content at the bottom of the wood is actually higher than the top of the wood, which is why that bottom part expands and then the top part shrinks, and that where you get a little bit of that cupping. That is the sort of thing that when the temperature or situation changes, it can change. So if it's not severely cupped, I would wait a little bit. And sometimes what people will do is they'll see it's cupped after like a bad winter or whatever, and before they let it do its thing and kind of level back out, they'll sand it so it's perfectly flat again. They'll get the floors refinished, and then what happens is you had the edges of the boards got thicker, right, than the center of the board, and you flattened it. Then when it goes back to what it was doing, it's going to be smaller. So then it goes to what's called crowning, where the middle is taller than the edges. So now you went and created a problem where you didn't have one before. So yeah, in that situation with solid wood floor, definitely get in between the recommended relative humidity, which is between 35 and 55%, and let the house sit there for a little bit and see what happens before you break something.
And one of the interesting things is the way we're building houses now. So where we have
They don't breathe.
Yeah, they don't breathe. So we had when we used to, when we were building all wood houses, we had slats underneath that wood floor that allowed air to get up under there, and everything was kind of controlled by the moisture level, and nobody ever thought about it. You know, the floors would warp a little bit. They knew they'd go back down. Now we have plywood. They don't breathe. And so you have to either be really patient or do something else.
Right. And that's where engineered wood floor is just a better, so you still get all the benefits of real wood. But, and then, you know, there's some that have that top layer that are really thin. They can't be refinished necessarily, but there's many of them that can be refinished the exact same amount of times as a solid. So it does remove a lot of the disadvantages of the old school kind of engineered, when it was like considered a cheaper alternative. Now it's actually more, in many ways, more expensive.
Well, and that's the
solid
advice that I give my clients when they're selecting engineered floor, is to look at the edge of the veneer and see and ask the salesperson, can this be refinished at least once?
Yeah, I'd say at least once. You know, at some point you can get a top layer so thick it becomes overkill, and you have a separate issue at that point, because anything really more than, once you get really north of 5 millimeters on that top layer, people kind of think like thicker is better, and that's not necessarily true. Thicker is more expensive, but anything between that 2 to 4 range is a sweet spot, because what happens, the thicker that top layer is, especially when it's a wider board, you've increased the amount of volume of that single piece of wood on that top layer. And so the more volume it is relative to the rest of the engineered plank, the more likely it is to move. It's going to command a lot more power. So what happens with some of these thicker topped engineered floors, like 5 to 6 to 7, things like that, they actually, if the seasons change, they're going to still want to do the same thing that solid floor did. And if there's enough volume there that it's more powerful than what's holding it to the rest of that board, it can pull itself apart.
It can delaminate.
So you actually have a less stable situation.
Yes, and it'll crack. I've seen that. And you're right. You're absolutely right. So let's talk about vinyl as a replacement product. This comes up a lot with these slab houses, and my opinion of vinyl is high. I love it. I think that the work you guys have done to design a wood look with vinyl and a durable, basically lifetime floor is totally amazing, because I've watched it go through its changes in the 40 years I've been doing this, and it's pretty amazing where we started and where we are now, and I'm assuming it'll continue to get better. What are your thoughts and advice on vinyl wood type flooring?
Yeah, so vinyl is it has been the fastest growing category in flooring, from when you talk carpet, wood, tile, vinyl. Vinyl's been the fastest growing for the last, I don't know, decade probably. And then in 2020, it was actually projected to outsell wood for the first time. And I don't know if it ended up, I mean, that was before the pandemic, so I don't know if that ended up happening. I got to check my numbers on that. But the technology, that has been where the investment has been. Wood is still the aspirational product. When we've done the consumer research, that's why vinyl looks like wood, because that is what people want. So we've seen a little bit of a shift in consumer preferences since the pandemic, where they want that sort of authenticity. I don't know what it is. There's this subconscious thing where people are tired of being lied to or something, and they don't want the floor to lie to them either. You're not wood. So it's, but
I just dropped a frying pan on you. You can't be wood.
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of the technology, both from a visual as well as a performance standpoint, it really has improved a lot, and it's hard not to. And they're starting to produce it in the United States now too. One of our suppliers, now all of our WPC, which stands for wood polymer composite, comes out of Georgia, as opposed to it used to all come out of China. And that actually was spurred on in a lot of ways by the trade war to get around the tariffs. We started actually manufacturing in the United States. There were cost benefits to that whole saga, which we probably don't have time to get into. But one of the outcomes of that was you're seeing more U.S. produced vinyl. I mean, sheet vinyl has been produced in the U.S. for a long time, but some of these more, they call the vinyl industry for flooring, they say there's a lot of TLA, which is 3-letter acronyms. You've got LVT, LVP, WPC, SPC. I can name letters all day. Actually, it's one of my favorite things. But it is amazing when you see how much the technology how far it's come now. And now they're doing things with all kinds of crazy designs. And we actually have the ability with some of our interior design partners to customize certain vinyl looks in smaller runs.
Really?
So now you're not ordering 50,000 square feet from Taiwan after you've paid $55,000 for just the roll of film. And then you got to get a shipping container, which is another thing right now. So yeah, it's amazing how far that's come. And it's not even just the low end of the market. You're seeing the high end vinyl now cost as much as mid-level wood.
That's where I wanted to go was cost, because the vinyl products that I'm seeing are really high quality. I mean, the level of quality has changed so dramatically.
Yeah. So the issue, obviously, you can't refinish vinyl. But a lot of it, because it's so durable and it's resilient, the joke with vinyl is it doesn't wear out, it uglies out. You're going to be sick of it probably before it needs to be replaced, which is the same problem I have with
my
tile,
wife
actually
said recently.
Yeah.
I thought you would wear out by now.
Yeah, well, I think it said the same thing to me, although I'm getting there after the last couple of years. It's been fun. I feel like I'm wearing out. But it has actually, I will say, business and I'm sure your business has seen the same thing. Just from the pandemic, our industry is surging right now because that's where everybody's spending their money, right? Americans spend their money on two things predominantly when they're not saving for retirement, which is most of the time, which is vacation in their homes. Right. And so now nobody's going on vacation.
No.
Hopefully that'll start changing pretty soon, but everybody's looking at their house going, well, what if I get locked in here again? So great time to be in home goods, great time to be in a trade, any trade really, has been, I don't know anybody who's not slammed right now.
So let's talk about, for my last question for you is accessibility to these products. So there's been a lot of drag on construction projects and contractors just getting product. How is that holding up in your industry?
Horribly. If I can be frank with you, we're friends. I can be honest with you. It's not great. It's really not great. And so with lumber, vinyl lumber, two different issues. Most of the vinyl's imported. So that is subjected to a lot of the import issues. And this isn't just our industry. It's furniture. There's a lot of stuff in there. I mean, if you look right now, when this is being recorded, you can go to the port of Los Angeles and look out over Long Beach, and it looks like we're being invaded. There is an armada of container ships that they can't get unloaded quick enough. To get a shipping container, one of our suppliers that buys from Cambodia, used to be from China, but the shipping container cost went from $2,000 to $10,000. If you get a shipping container, you got to get it onto a ship. Then if you get it on a ship, it's got to get to a port where it will be unloaded. I mean, they're sending ships from Asia down through the Panama Canal up to Atlanta, and they will be unloaded sooner than they would be if they just went to California.
Wow.
So that's the issue with imported goods. With domestic goods right now, and this is something we're really trying to help spread awareness of this, because it's just making everybody's life easier if the homeowners particularly understand that this is the situation right now. The lumber industry did not benefit from the trade war initially. It's kind of a complex story. I'll try to tell it quickly, but effectively what had happened was we went from a $3.7 billion trade surplus in 2017 to a deficit. And so our largest trading partner for North American hardwoods was China. So when that market went away pretty much overnight, it's about an 18-month forecast, the lumber producers were desperately worried there was going to be an oversaturation of the market because this surplus had to go somewhere. So then they were worried that was going to drive prices down through the basement, and then they wouldn't be able to profit. So they started scaling way back. And so I was part of a delegation that the Hardwood Federation sent to Congress in 2018 to talk about a number of issues, but this was one of them. So this was the big concern in 2018, was it's going to drive lumber prices down through the basement. It's going to devalue it, and these mills are going to start shutting down. So then as they scaled back production in order to help not oversupply the market, the pandemic happened 2 years later, which was nobody saw coming. And at least in our industry, nobody saw it coming. And so then all of a sudden demand now surged through the roof, but lumber companies had scaled considerably back over the last 2 years. So they were sort of uniquely
kind of caught. They were
unprepared
kind
for
of
this
caught
situation.
in a bear trap.
It was a perfect storm, really. I mean, it wasn't one person's fault or anything like that. It was just a series of circumstances that lined up perfectly to where now they had to shut down due to COVID. So they got behind on production because social distancing guidelines are not necessarily friendly to most factories. So they were running half the crews that they were so that they could keep the distancing guidelines. For a while, they had to shut down. I know my friend in Pennsylvania runs a mill in Western PA. She was saying they were shut down, considered non-essential, until somebody explained to the governor of Pennsylvania where toilet paper came from. You need sawmills. So that's that they opened right back up. They were only down for like 2 days.
Send him a roll of vinyl toilet paper and he'll get the message.
Never wears out.
Yeah. Man, we really appreciate you taking time out for us today. We just ran out of time.
Hey, my pleasure.
I always enjoy talking to you, and we always learn so much. John Dupra with Revel Woods, and somewhere upstate New York in some basement. Thank you so much, John. Have a great day, buddy.
You too, Alex. Thank you.
All right.